Hey everybody, Dr. Dan here, and this is the final desktop lecture for History 2010 for summer of 18. So this thing went really fast, 6 weeks and a lot of reading. I know that most of you tried to get through the material or at least skimmed through it and got through the assignments. So now we need to move forward. Now, one of the things I need to talk about is that this class is called America to 1865, but we're actually only going to 1860 because it would just be insane to try to cover all of this material. So, hopefully you don't feel like you're being ripped off in the sense that there were 5 years you're missing. It's probably the biggest 5 years in American history. The period between 1860 and 1865 is the period of the Civil War. But as I was looking at the text and trying to make this class manageable for 6 weeks, I decided that a good place to cut it off was 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln. So we're not going to get into secession and the beginning of the Civil War, but we are going to get into the politics of slavery. And I think that it's useful in Chapter 13 because it's sort of a run-up to this idea that there is going to be a Civil War. It's eventually, even though it's premised as a war over states' rights, which it certainly is, it eventually becomes a war on the ethic and legality of slavery. So if you want to read forward, Chapter 14 is the chapter that will talk to you about the Civil War. And it's interesting if you're a Civil War person, but I didn't want to force everyone to go that extra mile because there's just too much. And what you remember coming out of it when there's this much material is of questionable value, I think. So just know that Lincoln comes in 1860, the Civil War begins 1861, and goes up to 1865. So that's sort of the big thing we're missing here. So Chapter 13 is really about the politics of slavery, and just to go through that briefly because it is covered on the final. The economy is booming in the 1840s. We talked about that a little bit last time, and you start to see expansion of the railroad all the way to Chicago. Now, the railroad would not go across the country until 1869, the Transcontinental Railroad, so the West is really still not developed. But Chicago is starting to grow as a city on the western port of Lake Michigan, so keep that in mind. That puts things in perspective. The country is growing economically as both a manufacturing and an agricultural powerhouse, if you will. Western expansion, this notion of slavery, Missouri Compromise, some of this stuff is still going on, and it only makes sense that it would because that's part of the problem as far as secession goes in the Civil War. The Fugitive Slave Act we cover. That's the idea that if slaves run across the Mason-Dixon line and into the North, they're still considered property of Southerners. So this notion of Southerners coming up to the North, or even the duty of Northerners by law to let authorities know if there's a runaway slave, really upsets the social fabric, and it really makes slavery real for Northerners as well. So read about the Fugitive Slave Act. That's another big issue. Nativism, I mean, that's something we're really hearing today with this notion of build the wall to keep Mexicans out. There's a lot of nativism going on, and not against Mexicans, but against Europeans. So the Irish, we talked about a lot of Irish immigration. There's German immigration. There's also this anti-Catholic bias going on because Catholicism is not part of the country from the early time. So anti-Catholic bias and this notion of nativism, which I certainly would argue is still in place today, begins in Chapter 13 during this time. So read about that. There's Bleeding Kansas, again, sort of like the Missouri Compromise, this debate over when a new state comes into the West, are they going to be a free state or a slave state? So that's something that's important, and again, it fuels this political battle, which will eventually lead to the Civil War. There's the Dred Scott decision, and I think in my notes I say to make sure, to know what the Dred Scott decision is, but I'm at the same time not sure that it's on the final. I don't remember. So either way, that's an easy thing to look up in the index if it is on the final. And then finally, this idea with Lincoln and Stephen Douglas and the debates, and then Lincoln's eventual election in 1860. which closes out the chapter and really closes out the new material as far as the course is concerned. The other thing I want to do is just go through a final exam review with you. As I said before, most of the questions on the final, I think that maybe 20, maybe 15, 20 of them are exactly the same as the questions that were on the quizzes that you took in week 2 and in week 4, only now they're worth 10 points instead of 5 points. So if you have access to those old quizzes, those will be useful for you in determining what the correct answers are in the final. And then also, as I scroll through this, I added some questions from Chapter 13 that you'll be able to look up. Also, there are some questions, and pardon me, I'm going to look here. Questions 24, 25, and 26 and 27 are all about the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. And that's not something that came from the textbook, but I've given you a link in those questions you can easily click on. You can look at the Bill of Rights online and answer the questions. It might seem like a silly exercise, but I think if we get nothing else out of this class, we should understand what the Bill of Rights is all about and something about the important amendments of the Constitution. And I'll give one away here. So there's a question about the 15th Amendment. So certainly you should know about that. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are really the amendments that come out of the political arguments over slavery and the result of the Civil War. So there's a link there. You can go look at the 15th Amendment and just answer a simple multiple choice question and you'll be good to go. So that's the final exam. I don't think it'll be too hard. I'm looking the last questions, 28, 29. I even give you a page number so you can go and look up the answers to those, and then the other questions you've all seen before. So hopefully, you can get through the final without any trouble. It's 300 points, and it just serves as a good review of some of the most important things that line up with the course objectives of the course. Because after all, the course objectives, this notion of understanding critical thinking, understanding the roots of liberalism and the historical narrative as far as gender and race and how that's constructed, these questions all align to those course objectives in some way. So that's really what we're trying to do here. So it's been a great semester. If any of you have any questions prior to the final, let me know. Know that the final is due on the 21st, which is a Thursday. And again, I think it's probably one of the easiest assignments because you've been through most of this stuff before. But you cannot get into the final after the 21st. You'll be locked out of it. So make sure you get in there, get the final taken, because it's 300 points. It's a significant chunk of the final grade. So that's it. Thank you so much. You've all been great. Have a great rest of the summer, and please stay safe. Take care. Bye-bye.